I talked about the video game crash in my last video, and I mentioned briefly about how Nintendo started to revitalize the video game industry. I thought I'd talk a little bit more about that. What happened was no one had any confidence, neither consumers nor the retailers, in the video game industry. Plus, computers were out, and they were far more versatile than video games. Nintendo tried to start selling the original Nintendo Entertainment System. A very uninspiring name for a video game system, the Entertainment System. This was a new venture for Nintendo that they'd been doing very well in Japan for almost a decade, I want to say. But Nintendo themselves was almost 100 years old at this time. The history of Nintendo? Fascinating. Read the book Zapped. Anyhow, zapped. I meant game over. How Nintendo zapped generation, blah, blah, blah. What happened is that Nintendo came in, they said, hey, we are going to sell this product, and people didn't think it would succeed for a number of reasons. First of all, the video game industry was just dead. We know that from the last video. But also because Nintendo was selling an inferior quality product. What do I mean by that? The graphics were subpar. The processor wasn't as fast. This is absolutely true. When you compare it to the computers of the day, they were also far less versatile. And so people said, if you want to play video games, just buy a computer. You can have far more rich, complicated video games that are a lot harder, require different skills, and that sort of thing. However, that turned out not to be exactly what people wanted. The advantages of the Nintendo was that it was less expensive, it had fun, fast-paced multiplayer games that the computer just couldn't compete with. People wanted to play The Legend of Zelda, which was a single-player game, or Super Mario Brothers, which was a two-player game, or I can't tell you how many times in my childhood we were around the television with all of the adults playing Duck Hunt and having the little dog laughing at us. It was fun, and it was more accessible. By which I mean not that the games were easier to play, I meant getting the game and installing it on the computer was a lot easier. You didn't have to install it at all, you just slide the cartridge in. And more importantly, a lot of games at that time you would have the source code and you'd have to type it in by hand, especially earlier in the decade. And so it was easy, it was fun, it was cheap, and so people flocked to the Nintendo, and a generation of loyal gamers was created. And so this view of how you disrupt an industry by having a crappy product for non-users is, I think, really important. The key is that Nintendo made a product that satisfied what the demand was to play video games, was accessible so that people who didn't know how to program, operate a computer, or use or install things could use easily. And finally, I believe it was significantly cheaper because, of course, the hardware specs weren't anywhere near as good. So you had better quality, but you didn't have... So you had better quality in some respects, but not the traditional computer respects. So disruption is when you change the values of a system. So instead of valuing sophisticated graphics, sophisticated gameplay, it was easy to use, easy to access, easy to buy. And that's what really revitalized the video game industry in the late 80s and early 90s. And they did this by controlling the games, right? Video game companies were only allowed to make so many games a year if they wanted to have Nintendo's seal of quality. And people apparently really responded to that. The video game companies hated it because they couldn't make quick cash grabs. However, the people could have confidence that the games they were buying weren't going to be completely crappy. So it was very controversial in the video game industry. However, it was perhaps necessary in order to make actually consumer confidence and to be able to sell the games that they were making. And so that is a very important business lesson to learn, and an interesting part of the video game history, and how oftentimes it wasn't the most advanced and successful company that had the best-selling video game console. because that's not really what video games really seems to be about.